It's my privilege this morning to introduce our speaker, one who has been called by God to go and take the message to those who are lost. We are all called to do that, but some of us actually get to go, and others of us are the ones who need to labor and contribute and help those, support those who go. And Wesley Church is one of the supporters for David Greenlee and his wife, and we're privileged to hear from him today. He's been doing this for a little while, since 1977 with Operation Mobilization, and has been in many parts of the world. Some of that time was aboard ships in the Mediterranean, being, I guess you would say, creative access to people in North Africa. He also has graduated from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, easy for you to say, and was in our congregation in the 1990s, from 1992 to 1994. Chose to attend Wesley Church while he was going to school, and we're pleased to have made that connection and to have known him and his wife Rennie and their 3 children. Besides having a PhD in international studies from Trinity, he's also got a master's in electrical engineering, and he's an author and he's an editor. So please welcome David Greenlee.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. It's nice to be back with you. My wife sends her greetings as well, and our children have great memories of that. That's a little picture of us there, my wife and me. Franny, you can go to the next slide if you want. We have 3 kids. That was a picture. There's 3 kids and 2 dogs. 3 kids, 2, a son-in-law, a daughter-in-law, 1 grandchild with 2 on the way. One in about 2 months, and 1 coming about Thanksgiving time. And so that's a picture of us together in the mountains of Colorado last summer. We've been with, as Doug said, I've been with Operation Mobilization since I got out of university at the end of 1977. And came here. You can go to the next picture if you want there for me, Dwight. So that's looked a little bit different. I'd already lost my hair, but my kids were a little bit smaller at that point. That's what we looked like back here when we were attending church 30 years ago. So if I take off my glasses, it looks more or less the same. But we want to thank you because you have been incredibly faithful through all those years. Some people have come, some people have gone, some of you are still here from 30 years ago and more, but the church has been faithful in prayer, faithful in encouragement in various ways, and also faithful in giving, and we are very grateful for that. Becca, the oldest of our 3, she's doing her PhD herself at Trinity now. Jonathan is a lawyer near Denver. And Sarah, the little one, she's got a little one and another one on the way. She and her husband live in Northern California. We had come back to the States about 10 years ago. And then just last summer we moved to Denver, continue the work that I've been doing, which I'm going to talk about here in just a few moments, explain a little bit more what we do. But we still do that from there. These days, as so many people, if you're near an airport and internet connection, then a lot of things are possible as well. But what is Operation Mobilization? You can go to the next screen if you'd like to there for me, Dwight. Operation Mobilization, our vision statement, is that we want to see vibrant communities of Jesus followers among the least reached. We want to see a vibrant community of Jesus followers in reach of everyone. And whether that everyone, whether that gap, whether that missing place is somewhere among people who've recently arrived in the Chicago area, or whether that's in Central Asia or North Africa or some other such places, that's what we want to be about, to help those who have the least opportunity to hear the good news about Jesus to hear that. Dwight, can you pull up the video link then? Can we play that now? Just have a short 3-minute presentation that will give you a little bit of an overview in pictures and words of what Operation Mobilization is. If we can bring up could we see about restarting it with the volume a bit higher, Dwight? Thank you. Saying that over 3 billion people have never heard of Jesus, numbers growing by over 50,000 every day. Okay, if you can go back to the PowerPoint then, Dwight, and go to the next slide. So, Operation Mobilization, we are around 4,000 people from over 120 countries working in over 120 countries. So, how do Frenia and I get involved with this from the suburbs north of Denver? That's a picture of the house we bought last summer, which yesterday, my son said, had 3 or 4 inches of snow, very wet, heavy snow. So I'm glad we were here. It was nicer going to the botanical gardens yesterday with our daughter than shoveling snow on my driveway back at home. Well, one of the things then, let's go to the next slide there, Dwayne. One of the things that my wife and I do as part of our work is helping to keep connected with OM's missionary seniors. The picture of me there with the co-founder of OM's work, living in Florida now, dealing with Parkinson's disease, just one of the many workers who've given long, long years of service, but God says in Hebrews 6:10, God has not forgotten them. Hebrews 6:10, God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown him as you have helped his people and continue to help them. So that's one of the things that my wife and I do, is just trying to keep connected with some of our workers in their upper 70s and their 80s, and even a couple of them up into their 90s, and help them to keep connected even though their lives have changed a bit, slowing down in many ways to show them God's love. And reminding them of the beautiful passages such as Isaiah 46, verses 3 and 4, which applies to each of us as well as to them, that listen to me, O house of Jacob, all you who remain of the house of Israel, you whom I have upheld since you were conceived and have carried since your birth. Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am he. I am he who will sustain you. I have made you, and I will carry you. I will sustain you, and I will rescue you. And even that command, the fifth commandment, to honor our parents, part of that's not so much a matter of just rote, strict obedience, but it's a matter of honoring them and showing that even when the world might be saying that you're not of as much value anymore, but we honor them and we respect and we show them what they're doing. Then go to the next slide, if you would, then, for me. Another aspect, and that's part of the training that came here at Trinity back many years ago, is something we call missiology. Theology, the study of God; biology, the study of bios, of life; missiology, the study about mission. What is God doing in the world? And so the role I've had for many years is involved with helping our leaders, and also from other organizations as well, to think through some of the questions that are coming up and try to understand from the Bible, to understand also simply from how the world is, what we should be doing, to monitor the progress that we're making, to understand, for example, what are the right kind of workers, who are the right kind of people that are going to be most fruitful in ministry as well, our impact on the community, and so on. Next one, please, Dwight. From that then came something that those of you who read our newsletters will see I've mentioned several times. It's a book that we referred to as Undivided Witness, and then a training program that comes out of that as well, looking at 10 principles that explore the heart of workers, not so much a practical guide about how to go a community development project, but what is our heart? How do we understand God's kingdom and how people enter that? And then recognizing that people are whole people, and recognizing that, so often we have solutions. I have a solution for somebody, and I want to impose that on them, but it's not even a question they're asking. So it's coming to find out what is the questions that the people in the community are asking. What do they see as important? How can we come alongside and help them as well? And then part of that, though, is recognizing that wholeness of life and the way that we demonstrate the gospel and the way we explain the gospel are completely integrated. There's no division. There's no separation. We give them our best in terms of professional excellence. We give them our best in terms of service and caring. But we also, with that, we give them an understanding of Jesus and his love as well. By the way, there's a course upcoming that I'll be teaching. We've turned this into an 11-part course, which is offered in various formats. I'm going to actually be teaching it online starting a week from tomorrow for a Bible college in Sri Lanka. It'll be 8 in the morning for me and 7:30 at night for them. But over our summer, the following 13 weeks or so, it'll be a couple of hours every Monday morning for me going through this material. But the course is being offered in various places around the world. Then if you go on to the next one then, please, Dwight. But this then led to a focus on something that we talk about as caring for creation. How can caring for creation be a part of people coming to know Jesus? And in turn, to the formation and vibrancy of communities of Jesus followers, of new churches. So if I say that word, care for creation care, just think for a moment, what would that come to mind for you? What would caring for creation come to mind for you? Well, when we talk about it in OM, we talk about the way we look after and care for our environment, the world that God has made. It has to do with recognizing that the way we live affects our communities. The way we live can also impact people far away, as well as how my children and their children will live. So think about caring for creation. Many times, I'm sure most of us, when we sit down before a meal, we give thanks for our food. But do we also thank God for the farmers who raised that food? Do we give thanks for the truckers who brought the food to us, the people in the store who put it on the shelf so that we could purchase it, and so on? We want to have an integrated approach that respects the wholeness of life and the world around us. This idea of caring for creation is grounded deeply in Scripture. If you go back to Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, I'm sure you remember those stories there, where God talked to Adam and Eve and after he'd created the humans, and he said that there's some question about exactly what the best translation of the Hebrew word of what they were told to do, but whatever it was they were supposed to do in caring for the garden, it was caring for it in the way that God the Creator would himself care for it. That was the way they were supposed to care for it, which to me is an idea of caring in a way which respects the beauty, respects all of the enjoyment that God has in that creation. If we look at Deuteronomy 28, we see it's a place where Israel is about to enter in. They've been coming through the desert. They've been 40 years wandering, and then they're about to go into what was the land that had been promised to them. And Moses is talking to them, and among other things, he's pronouncing blessings for obedience, but also curses for disobedience. And it's interesting, in Deuteronomy 28, part of the blessing is essentially if you obey God, if you're following God, then the rains are going to come and the land is going to yield a good harvest. Things will be cared for. You'll have what you need. But if you disobey, if you turn away, it says the skies are going to be like bronze. It's not going to be the rain. You're not going to have the produce. You're going to struggle. So it's very interesting there that obeying God, following him, there is an impact. There's a relationship to how we live. But one of my favorite passages along these lines is in Psalm 104. Psalm 104, as David or whoever wrote the words to that psalm, describes, it's almost as if God is just sitting back and laughing and having fun with all of the beautiful creatures that he has made. Psalm 104, it's a long psalm, but verse 24, he says, "How many are your works, O Lord? In wisdom you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures." And then verse 31, "May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works. He who looks at the earth and it trembles, who touches the mountains and they smoke." But also then he talks about the great joy. And it's almost like God is laughing and smiling as he sees the beautiful creatures that he is caring for as well. But then a passage which gets a little bit more directly, shall we say, theological, in talking about Jesus. And it's in Colossians chapter 1, a beautiful passage about Jesus. And I'm just going to read that, Colossians 1, 15 to 20. Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Jesus is the firstborn, sort of like being the oldest brother, over all creation. And then it's interesting, Paul goes on saying, "For by him all things were created." Not some things, all things. Jesus created all things. By him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things were created by him and for him. Created by him and for him. So Jesus is the creator of all things. And then it says he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Back when I was in engineering school a long time ago, we talked about physics and all the different forces that hold, whatever. So in one sense, yes, the way the electrons and protons and neutrons, all that work, there's a good physics explanation for that, but in Jesus, all things hold together. He's the sustainer. He created all things. He sustains all things. And then he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, in Jesus, and through him to reconcile to himself all things. Jesus, he's the creator of all things, he's the sustainer of all things, and he's the reconciler to God of all things. So that's some of the basis as we think about caring for creation and what it means and what we do. It's there throughout Scripture. Jesus, the creator, the sustainer, and the reconciler to God of all things, of all of creation. So how do we respond? Well, we like to think about caring for creation not as a task, not as an activity, not as something I should do, and then I can tick it off, I've done it for this week. But it's a value that helps to define the way we live. Sometimes it'd be interesting. In Colorado now, we don't even have plastic bags in stores or styrofoam cups in restaurants. But when we were living in Georgia, there were times we'd go to a checkout at a store, and the young woman would say, "Oh, would you like helping bags?" And I'd say, "Well, no, we brought our own bags." And we said, "We'd rather not use the plastic." And then I tell them, it's usually an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, said, I would kind of like the world to still be a nice place when you get to be my age. And they look at me and they go, "Really?" Wow. And then sometimes they say, "Thank you." Well, it's just a small thing. I'm not saying that that's the permanent solution for everything bad in the world. But it's a small thing to demonstrate a life of value that shows to others, to those young children, that it matters. It makes a difference. To those young adults, it makes it what I recognize that what I do is going to affect the way the world is for them for the years to come. And so we care for creation based on what Scripture says because it's the right thing to do. But we recognize, we can go to the next slide then, if you would. Okay, one more, sorry. There we go. Now that map, I'm not sure if you can see that very well there. It's a bit far away from you. But if you look up at the map there, we recognize creation care is something, the environmental issues are incredibly important around the world and in some of the least reached areas of the world. We think that one band there across Africa, you can see there on the left of the slide, it's a region called the Sahel. Desertification, loss of farmland, the lack of rain. There's a huge challenge in that part of the world. If you go to South Asia, to Bangladesh, to Pakistan, that area over there north of India, and some of those regions, and over into the Mekong area, the Mekong River area, north of Malaysia, up in Myanmar and in Thailand, flooding. It's incredible the floods that are coming. Or at the same time, it might be the total lack of rain in others. If you go to the big cities of India, if you go to the Arabian Peninsula, terrible pollution. Cities like New Delhi in India that have just faced incredible pollution, devastating for people's health. And so many other places where there's environmental and degradation of the land, so it's so much harder to farm as well. But what does all this then have to do with the good news and with an undivided witness? Let's go to the next slide then, if you would, Dwight. What does this have to do with good news, with helping people recognize, see the gospel lived out, but also understand the good news? Last summer, shortly after we moved to Colorado, it was very hot last summer in August. Not humid like we had in Georgia, but very hot. And a young woman came by our house, and I forget, the salespeople coming by was trying to get new siding or windows or doors. I'm not sure. She was trying to sell me something, which we didn't need. But we did start talking. I gave her some cold water because she was very thirsty. And we were talking a little bit, and of course, we were talking about how hot it was and so on. So after we talked about that a bit, I looked at it and I said, I think there's a loving creator who made all this. And I really don't think he intends it or wants it to be this way. And she looked at me and she said, wow, nobody has ever said anything like that to me before. And then after she'd left, I thought, I wonder why nobody had ever said something like that to her before. Of putting together God, the loving creator, and the situation of the world that we find ourselves in. So how can demonstrating the good news through caring for creation, how can it help people like that young woman come to know something about the gospel? We'll go to the next slide if you would there. If you go to the Adriatic Sea, opposite Italy, you can see there a little point there, to the country of Montenegro. It was part of what used to be Yugoslavia years ago. You go to Montenegro, you'll find a couple there. They're from Georgia. She used to be a 4-H instructor in schools south of Atlanta. But they have a program there. They've bought an acre of land. They have an organic garden. And they bring in school children. School children to the city, most of them, and I bet a lot of the children around here, have no idea where the food comes from except from a jar or a plastic bag or the fridge. They have no idea where their food comes from. So they talk about the earth. They talk about earthworms. They talk about the plants. They show them, they plant seeds, and then they can come back later and see what happened. The seeds sprouted and they grew, and maybe they can pick their own tomato or something like that. Quite something. But as they do that, and they're talking about creation, they're talking about how plants grow, they also find the ways then to bring into it how a loving God created it, how a loving God is the one who's behind all this. And then there are some with their families who might want to come to know about Jesus more. I think about that story about Jesus being, or the passage we read about Jesus being the creator and the sustainer and the reconciler of all things. If we go to the next slide then, Dwight, please. If we go to South Central Africa along the shores of Lake Tanganyika, a few years ago, one of our ministries there, there's a lot of people, it's a very large lake, not as big as Lake Michigan, but very large lake, maybe half the size of the lake, but there's a lot of fishing along the shores of the lake. And people, when they go out in their fishing boats, they would be involved in various sacrifices to their various gods. There was even literal child sacrifice, sacrificing babies so that they would get fish. Well, some of our team then, some of the local people, some of the believers who were working among them, they got their fishing boat. They named it the Blessing. And they publicly prayed. And they prayed to the living God. Reminds some stories maybe from the Old Testament. But they prayed to God that he would provide. And some of the other people, they laughed at them. They laughed and said, well, you're not doing these sacrifices, you won't catch any fish. You know what happened? They caught a lot. The other people didn't catch anything. Now, I'm not going to tell you that that suddenly turned everybody in the village to coming to know Jesus, but it was a start. Because they began to see, their worldview began to change. They began to recognize, oh, there's a better way. There's a loving God. And even the way we go about the fishing. And there's a program called Foundations for Farming, or Farming God's Way. The way we go about farming, we can preserve the land. It doesn't have to be destroyed. So caring for creation can be coupled with this of helping people understand about this loving God, about Jesus, who created all things, sustained all things, and reconciles all things to God. And that also has to do with the way we go about our fishing and the way we go about our farming. And speaking of farming, go to the next one as well. Caring for creation can be a way of demonstrating our love for our neighbors. Now, a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, you gave a very generous gift that went to some ministry that we've been involved with in Mozambique and going over into Zambia as well. It had to do with projects related to chickens, raising chickens, and also reforestation, but that was affecting the lives of people in those countries. Well, there's a drought in southern Zambia right now, and there's going to be a very weak corn harvest this year, one of my friends told me. But he posted something then on a WhatsApp group that I'm part of with some of our workers there. I'm mainly just observing exchange between some of our African workers. And he said that we need to help people understand, like that passage from Deuteronomy, that how we live and how we serve God, that does affect the rain, and it does affect the food that we have. We need to help them understand that. And then he said something fascinating. We actually have a really good harvest coming here in the north of the country. We need to help take some of that and sell it to the people in the south who don't have as much, but not marking up the price, not taking advantage of the situation so that we can help them in their poverty. Now that is a real demonstration of a changed heart, that you're not taking advantage of other people in a situation like that, but letting this demonstration of the gospel, the understanding of the gospel, and let that be spread, living out so that you're caring for people in practice as well. And caring for creation is one of the values that helps to shape that whole part as well. And then go on a little bit more of this project that you contributed to. Dwight, the next slide if you would there. How does caring for creation demonstrate that we are whole people and demonstrate hope for today as well as hope for the far-off future? Well, there where in this area of Mozambique and southern Tanzania, sadly there's been some fighting. There have been people there's a lot of violence and some extremists that are coming in. And there is a number of young women who have been driven out of their village. And they've arrived at the city where one of our teams is, and a man who there is involved in agriculture and cleaning up the garbage in the city and various things like that. But he realized that there's quite a number of these young women who have been forced away from their homes, and they're stuck and they're alone, and well, you can imagine the one job they can find, which will give them some money. And he's found a way that involves chickens, and it involves raising some vegetables, but it's helping these young women get out of prostitution and be able to feed themselves and protect themselves. And it's also part then of not just the practical, it's very important, that practical help, but it's helping them to see that this is all flowing out of the love of Jesus, who wants to reconcile them to the living, loving God as well. It flows from that too. Go to the next slide then, if you would, for me, Dwight. Then another place, very different setting from rural southern South Central Africa. We go to Hong Kong, quite a huge metropolis. And so you see a picture there of Susie. Susie's retired now, but not retired from talking about Jesus. And she's not retired from gardening. One thing she told me is that gardening is really good for her hands because she has arthritis, and she says just getting down in the dirt does somehow it alleviates the pain of the arthritis in her hands. But you know what she does? You can see that picture over there. There's a garden. It's a community garden that a few people started. And there's immigrants, people, just like you have immigrants coming from who knows, you don't even know where they're all from. You have a lot of immigrants around here. Well, they have a lot of immigrants in Hong Kong as well from many different countries. And so they come to this community garden, and they get their hands dirty together, and they plant some vegetables together, and eventually they grow, and then they talk and they laugh, and they become friends, but then that also leads to the chance not just of demonstrating the gospel, but explaining as well who Jesus is, centered around that garden. Or then one more thing. Go to the final slide here, there. This is in Zaventem, outside Brussels, Belgium. So in that old building, that's an old factory building that it was the first building that our mission actually bought back in 1963. We hardly ever bought any property for many, many years. They bought that. It was a center for training. There was a garage there for vehicles and so on. Well, right now, inside that building are the servers for a very significant internet ministry, which is reaching out to many people, thousands and tens of thousands of people in Belgium and beyond. And that's housed there. Well, if I had a more up-to-date picture of that, you would see solar panels that have gone on top of that building. And there's two things that are interesting about the solar panels, because in Belgium and in much of Europe, caring for the environment is incredibly important, incredibly important. And so Martin, our leader of our ministry there, said that people, when they look at your roof in Belgium, they see what is in your heart. Meaning, how can you say you serve a loving God and you don't actually care for the environment and so on? So that's one aspect. But it's also interesting that those solar panels are then providing the power to power those energy-hungry servers that are spreading the gospel on the internet and making a difference there. So that's a practical way, which you might say where creation care overlaps a bit with a business principle, but it's also part of the witness that is going on there as well, communicating the good news. And then finally, just to wrap up in the last slide here, you know, I have preached many times, and I probably have preached here over the years, from Revelation 5, verse 9. And there's a beautiful passage, Revelation 5:9, very similar in Revelation 7:9, where John, in his vision, he saw people from every tongue and tribe and nation, you know, people from all the languages and tribes and groups all around the world, praising God. And I would always just stop there at verse 9. I don't know why, but I always did. And then I realized, and it's not that long ago to my chagrin, Revelation 5:13 says, not just every tongue, tribe, and nation, but he said, then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea and all that is in them singing salvation, singing to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever. Do I know how that's going to actually work out in practice in the end when the Lord comes back and sets everything right? No, I don't really know how that's going to work out. But there's something there that's amazing, that God, our loving God, has a plan which involves all this amazing, astounding creation that he has made, and the way we go about caring for that as well. That can be part of how I demonstrate the gospel, and is part of how I explain the gospel, so that in this wholeness, in its fullness, it also becomes something of people coming to know Jesus. So from time to time, and even as I told you that story about the young woman who was trying to sell me windows or siding or something, even as I told you that story a few minutes ago, I breathe a prayer with that. Because I thought, do you remember what I said? I wonder why no one ever told you that before, that there's a loving God who really cares for his creation, cares for her. So even as I'm saying these words, I'm praying that God will somehow bring more people into her life who will help her understand that good news as well. Well, thank you very much. I know that are you going to come in? I'm not sure who's coming next to take over, but I appreciate the chance to share with you. Glad to chat with you a little bit afterwards as well. But we really do appreciate the fellowship, the support, the generosity, and the prayers that you have been faithfully demonstrating in our direction for many years. And God be with you.